An amazing guest, as well as the rest of you who are wonderful guests, and we're happy to have you back. I'd like to introduce Professor Sarah Garman, who needs no introduction, one of our amazing faculty here at the college, along with the faculty members that are here joining you, as well as those who are online. Welcome to our schools. We're so happy to have you. And without further ado, Professor Garman.
Thank you, Chair Mooney. Before I start, I would like to ask Miami-Dade students who are either in the room or online if you could scan the QR code that you see on the screen. It might not be on there right now. I'm not actually sure, but it will be on in about 1 minute. So if you could scan the QR code, I would appreciate that. Okay, so I would like to introduce my friend, Wendy Lockhart. Wendy is a teacher of 32 years. While she retired recently in 2020, her passion is still to cultivate students' love of history through literary works. Her school, St. Jerome Catholic School, was awarded the nationally known No Place for Hate recognition by the Anti-Defamation League for a program Wendy developed and directed. In 2005, Wendy received the Distinguished Teacher Award for the South Atlantic States from the National Catholic Education Association. Wendy has been studying the Holocaust for 15 years at numerous Holocaust institutes and has studied at the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., where she was the recipient of the prestigious Holocaust Memorial Museum Teacher Fellowship in 2019. Please welcome Wendy Lockhart. Wendy, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Professor Garman, for that nice bio, and thank you for coming this morning, and I'm very happy and honored to be here with you to present something to you that is very dear to my heart and something that maybe you will learn from and appreciate. As Professor Garman said, I've been teaching Holocaust education for 15 years for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade middle schoolers in the area of literature. Now, how many of you in middle school, with a raise of hand, learned anything about Holocaust education in middle school? Great, all right, so you've got a little bit of a background. Maybe you're taking a class now, maybe you took a class in high school. But this is just a presentation because, and I was invited to come here today to speak with you because it's International Women's Month, and it's also Holocaust Awareness Week here at Miami-Dade College. And so I decided to do a presentation on 5 women who I read on. I have all their books here. You're welcome to look at them later. And I studied them, and I thought it would be a wonderful idea to do like a little glimpse of their lives and what they did that were extraordinary, even though in their own societies they were considered ordinary women. But you will find through the slides and meeting these women that they had a common thread among them, and that would be their family values of love and kindness and care and compassion, and that's what really drilled them to do something out of the ordinary to help their fellow man at a time in history which was so difficult for their community. So at this time, I would like to begin my presentation. But first of all, I want to go over some vocabulary with you. All right, the first thing is resistance. We know about resistance in science class, all right? But resistance during the Holocaust took on a different meaning, all right? By historian Yehuda Bauer, she said that any action that was taken against all laws imposed by the Germans. So what could resistance have meant? All right, the first thing that we think of is armed uprisings. All right, Roman Kent, who was a Holocaust survivor, died just last year. He was in the Łódź Ghetto in Poland and also survived the death camp of Auschwitz, said that resistance doesn't have to be with a gun and a bullet. However, there were many uprisings, especially in the Warsaw Ghetto, That lasted several weeks. Of course, they lost, but yet people managed to find ways to get weapons to fight against the Gestapo, the the service, and the Nazis themselves. Another form of resistance would be undetected underground groups to coordinate revolts. This happened in mostly the ghettos, where they lived and they planned and they smuggled in weapons and they organized uprisings. A lot of times, in most cases, it wasn't successful. The partisans, and you'll be learning about the partisans in my slides, were groups of people that hid in the forests. They ran away from their local police, their local governments, hid in the forests and set up communities for the purpose of sabotage. All right? Hiding in plain sight. It was difficult, but it was possible if people had the money and the wherewithal to change their identity from Jewish to something else, most likely Christian. All right, and so that was a difficult thing to do, but many of them did it in order to survive the areas in which they lived. Documenting life and destruction. We know that the Holocaust is one of the most documented events in recent history. So what did people do? They wrote diaries, they created newspapers, they smuggled in paper to do it, and they documented, men and women and children, to tell what was going on in the ghetto, in the camp, in their community. And those were the items, those were the documents that were found. Concealed out of sight, as I said earlier in the Partisans, people lived in caves, barns, attics, forests. Believe it or not, but Palm Beach County has a very large population of Holocaust survivors that maybe were never in a ghetto, maybe never went to an extermination or labor camp, but they spent their years during the war hiding and running from place to place, whether it was basements or attics, farmhouses, and they did that and they survived. That is called resistance. Escaping from deportation trains. Not very often, but men and women who were placed in the boxcars found ways to open the bars of the tall, narrow windows and jump out while it was moving. Imagine how they had to have help to get out of the window, falling from the train, and probably getting found anyway, and maybe put to their death. Cultural resistance. People in the ghettos and in the camps all over created schools for those that were with them, created hospitals. The cultural society that they created, that was what was against the Nazi ideology. Spiritual resistance, too, of singing their Hebrew songs, their religious songs, praying together and in secret, pretending to have little meetings, and actually it were prayer services. And on some of the Hebrew holidays, they fasted, even in the concentration camps, on holidays when it was part of their religion to fast, and they were starving to begin with. They fasted as a resistance to what the Nazis were doing to them. So when we go through resistance with these ladies, you'll understand that they did some of these items. Next. The next word that I'm going to be using is the ghetto. What was a ghetto during the Holocaust? Ghettos were enclosed districts of larger towns or communities that separated Jews from non-Jews or from Jews from other Jews in their communities. They were sectioned off by their military, by the local police, by the Gestapo, by the SS, for the form of further being deported and being brought to their death in camps. Many people died from starvation, disease. The situation was horrible. Many 7 or 8 families living in one apartment, lack of privacy, and they were forced to work for the Germans for the war effort, and they were ordered to give up their homes, their belongings, everything that they had, whether it was beautiful plates or silver, women's furs and jewelry, wedding bands, things like that. They were forced to give up upon entering the ghetto. And here you see a picture on the left, a photograph of Jewish people of the community in Warsaw building their own brick wall around the ghetto. The Nazis weren't going to do it, but they did. And then on the right is a picture of the Łódź Ghetto, which is in Warsaw, Poland. All right, I'd like for you to meet Irena Sendler, 1910 to 2008. She was a Polish humanitarian, social worker, and nurse who served in the Polish underground during the resistance. Her family life. Irena was born in Otwock, Poland, a small town outside of Warsaw. She was very much influenced by her father, who was a doctor. At the age of 2, Irena was sick with the whooping cough. They sent her away to what was called a sanatorium until she was about 7. All right, and during that time, her father died of typhus, all right, which you get from lice and fleas. And he was serving the Jewish people that were ill, so he contracted that from his own patients. And she was so enamored by her father and what he did that she said, I was taught that if you see a drowning person, you must jump into the water to save them, whether you can swim or not. That's pretty bold. Some images of Otwock here on the upper left is just a picture of a typical outdoor marketplace, about in the 1920s to 30s, a bazaar. Down at the bottom left is the picture of the sanatorium that Irena stayed in as a little girl until she got better. And then on the top right was a picture of a train station. All right, in Warsaw, Irena became a social worker. Obviously, she had the insistence of her family and her values of her family, her influence, all right? And she worked in a place called a canteen. And when the ghettos were created and Poland was occupied by the Nazis in 1939, she used those canteens as a social worker to give out food, to give out medicine, to give out clothing to the persecuted Jews of the population. So here's a picture of her in a kind of a truck, all right? And on the right is a picture of her as a nurse. There's very little documentation that Irena really went to nursing school. People have said that that was a disguise that she wore in order to get into the Warsaw Ghetto. Actually, she graduated from the University of Warsaw in the area of Polish literature. So now begins her work, when things really get heavy in the Warsaw Ghetto, all right? She started to smuggle out orphaned children. That was her target, all right? And she got help from a group called the Epidemic Control Department, which is sort of like our Center for Disease Control today. And she got to wear an armband that allowed her to get into the ghetto to do that kind of work, all without the knowledge of the Nazis that were there. All right, and here you see some pictures of little kids at the time. So here's what she did. She persuaded parents to part with their children. Imagine a stranger coming up to a parent and saying, I need for you, in order for your child to be safe, I would like for you to give me your child, and I will bring them to safety. Imagine the heartache that those parents had to undergo for that kind of sacrifice. But they trusted Irena. They trusted the people that Irena worked with, and they gave their children to her because she promised them that she would give them safety, even though the parents said, I may not make it myself. And she wore the Jewish star on an armband, even though she was Catholic, as support for what the work that she was doing. She issued false documents. She created false documents, sort of like baptismal certificates, First Holy Communion certificates, to make sure that those children were safe. How are you going to get them out of the ghetto? Well, this is what she did. She took them in body bags. She took them out in toolboxes, potato sacks, coffins, all under the watchful eye of the Gestapo at the gates, through sewers and through hidden doorways of churches and other stores that might have had one door in the ghetto and the other door not in the ghetto. All right? Children were placed in orphanages, in convents, in monasteries, and a total of 2,500 children she saved. And she kept the paperwork on this, hid them in little jars, and buried them for her to return to after the war. In October 1943, she was sent to this prison. She finally got arrested. And during her time there, she was tortured badly, legs broken, and she would not give the information of who helped her. All right? She kept it secret. She was sentenced to death, but fellow helpers bribed the prison guards to release her, and she finally got out. So after the war, she kept in hiding from the time she left prison. She dug up the jars and tried to relocate the parents with the children. But of course, many of the families were already gone. They had been deported, sent to their deaths, all right? Gave the documents to the children. Maybe they knew who they really were in real life. Maybe they chose to keep on their same identity with the people that helped them, all right? But most of the time, the families were lost. So here is a movie that is out. It's rather old. It was called The Courageous Heart. But this is the book that I read. It's very interesting if you would like to order it online. It's a fast read. All of these are fast reads, but it tells everything that I've told you. And so there's Irena as an old lady. She survived, and she was very happy. And she became one of what was called the righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. Yad Vashem is the premier Holocaust museum and documentation center in Jerusalem. And people who saved Jews and other undesirables during the Holocaust, if there is enough documentation, at one time would get a tree planted in their honor. All right, and here's her tree with her family that went to visit. And so there's Irena. What a beautiful story of courage. All right, now we meet Sarah Gennate. She was from Lithuania, and she was a resistance fighter in Coveno, Lithuania, 1924 to 2018. All right, so she lived. Here are some images of the town she lived in Coveno, Lithuania. On the left, just a plain street. On the right, upper right, is a picture of a synagogue at that time in the 30s. And then look at that open air marketplace, another bazaar. So people lived happy lives before the Nazi occupied their country. They did all sorts of things that you and I would do in their lives until things really changed for them. So Coveno was a center of Jewish learning. All right, the yeshiva was the center of highest Jewish learning. There were many businesses, organizations, synagogues, schools, and so forth. And so it was wrapped up in their Hebrew culture. And this is a photograph of a typical kindergarten in Coveno, but this is not where Sarah went to school. This is just the little kids there. And here, very quickly, 1933, the Baltic countries. So you have a mental map of where Lithuania is and where Coveno is. It's down at the bottom, the southern part of Lithuania. All right, the Coveno Ghetto was created in 1941, of course, when the Nazis occupied the country. They established the Coveno Ghetto to force the people inside to work for the German war effort, all right? The ghetto, as I said earlier, separated Jews from non-Jews, all right? But it was for later deportation or mass murder. The living conditions in the Coveno Ghetto were just as bad as I had said earlier about lack of privacy, lack of water and food and so forth. But anyway, this is where Sarah met her future husband, Misha Robinson. Yes, I'm sure that there might have been, during that time that was of despair and hope, love prevailed. All right, and this is what Sarah and Misha found to do as part of their resistance in the Coveno Ghetto. They smuggled in and distributed food, medicines, and clothing. All right, and so they were Jewish. So they were able to do this for their fellow man. They smuggled in guns, radios. Radios, one of the number one items that the Nazis said was illegal for any Jew to have, because they did not want the Jews to know what was going on in the outside world. All right? They created a Jewish newspaper. So of course you didn't have a radio. They're going to create a newspaper, smuggle it in to let people know what was going on the outside world. And Sarah pretended to be a nurse to escort sick people, all right, maybe not sick, all right, to the ghetto hospital, but then actually from the hospital to escape into the forest to freedom. All right, since Sarah was blonde and she was fluent in Lithuanian language, she risked her life to go on spy missions. That was her in. But where to go? Into the forests where the partisans were. So they went to the Rudniki forest in Lithuania, and these people were military groups, all right? They lived in dugouts, and they concealed in forest camps. Partisans killed Nazis and their local collaborators, people that were on the same side as the Nazis. They disrupted transportation, communication lines. They dynamited railroad tracks, enemy power plants. These people were serious. And Sarah was one taking information from the ghetto to the forest, back and forth. How dangerous that was. 15% of the women in that community were women. And what did they do? Well, first of all, for men anyway, if you wanted to go into that forest, you had to have your own weapon. All right? Had to have your own weapon. Women had to maybe have a special skill of sewing, of cooking, of course, taking care of babies. So these partisan groups not only had a society of their own, but it was concealed. All right, here's some pictures on the lower left of women partisans and men and women partisans. Okay. And here's some other pictures of actual partisans in their dugouts. And sometimes those groups, those partisan camps, had to be transient, had to move at a moment's notice when they found out if the Germans were on the prowl and on their way, because they found out. The 100 fighters in each of these bunkers, all right, slept side by side, a central bathroom, a makeshift hospital, a commissary where they could barter or buy little goods, not too much, all right? Due to lack of food and the living conditions and harsh weather, these people had lice, they had scurvy, gum disease, rickets, pneumonia, all from lack of eating properly. But they continued on, all right? And on a daily basis, they set off to do their sabotage, or by smuggling food or stealing food from nearby farms. So here's another picture of two partisans in their dugout, and the color photographs are what they look like today. All right, both Sarah and Misha escaped. They survived the war. Her mother, unfortunately, was sent to the Stutthof concentration camp where she died. She became a professor of economics, Misha was a journalist. They moved to Canada, and she was a professor at York University. Here's her book, Resistance and Survival. You can also get that if you're interested in reading more about her account. This is an autobiography, and that is Sarah there. All right? So I'd like to introduce you now to Hannah Senesch, Hungarian paratrooper. She was in parachutes, and a poet, 1921 to 1944. And here is a map of Hungary. She was from Budapest, which is the capital, which is almost in the center of the country. Hannah was born in 1921. Her father was a very, very famous author and journalist. Eventually, she became influenced by that work of her father. Her mother was an elegant homemaker, as it says, so she had money. You know, this was not a poor family. Her father died when Hannah was a child. And here is a beautiful picture of Hannah and her brother George. When Hungary instituted their anti-Jewish laws, Hannah decided, as a young woman, to move from Hungary to Palestine, which we know today is present-day Israel, because at that time Jews could become full citizens. She attended an agricultural school, she washed laundry, she scrubbed floors, did all sorts of things with fruits, olives, served on guard duty, worked in the dairy, all sorts of things in the agricultural school. She also went to a Christian school as a little girl before coming to Palestine, but her tuition was 3 times larger than everybody else because she was Jewish. And so there, as a little girl, she became aware of anti-Semitism and how people treated her and her family and her community different. But during this time in the agricultural school, she yearned for something more. All right? She was writing diaries already. She loved writing. She wanted something more romantic to help people fight against anti-Semitism. And we're not talking about romance, but something that was so fulfilling and self-satisfying to help the people that were in need. So in 1943, all right, Hannah joined the Allies and went to Egypt to be trained as a paratrooper, to jump out of a plane with a parachute. How much more romantic can you get for a female at that time, all right, to be able to march herself back into Hungary to help people in Budapest? She was one of 33 people that were trained to be a parachutist over Yugoslavia, and then to make her way into Hungary. But before that, when she landed, she stayed 3 months with a partisan group, and we all know what now a partisan group is. So she experienced a lot of the life of a partisan group for 3 months. And this is where, under duress, under all of this pain, that she wrote her most famous poem called "Blessed is the Match." All right, and I'll show you the pictures. A beautiful picture of her on the far left. Up on the top is a photograph of 2 gentlemen that were trained with her, and on the bottom right is a picture of her in her uniform with her brother George. This is the last photograph taken of her before her first and only paratrooping mission. So I'd like to read the poem to you, all right? Blessed is the match. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. So what do you think that meant to her? What do you think provoked her to write such beautiful, beautiful words and the use of metaphors? To me, it means that she was the match, and by lighting a flame, she was helping others that were in need. And that flame would grow and prosper, and people would do the same thing and be their own personal matches. Aren't we a match today? Aren't we the match that can cause a flame to begin by just saying a kind word, helping a neighbor, doing some community service in our community, in our state, being watchful of others? That's the idea that we have and the power that we have, and can take it from this poem. So during that time, Hannah was arrested, parachuting into Hungary. She was beaten. She was tortured. They even, and also I want to mention that documents say that she had a radio transmitter with her when she was arrested. And of course, the Nazis wanted that. And they wanted the code. She wasn't going to give it. They even brought her mother in to kind of coerce or kind of influence Hannah to give up the code and any other information that she had. She hadn't seen her mother in 5 years. Hannah still wouldn't do it. So she was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad. And her mother was forced to watch it. Hannah was 23 years old. Not much older than many of you in here. And look what she did. Hannah was buried in a Jewish cemetery. All right, on the upper right, you see her tombstone with her photograph. And if you can see on the upper left of that tombstone, what do you see? You see a parachute that was engraved into the tombstone. And then on the left was a memorial that is still in Budapest, Hungary today in her honor. Now, getting on to K Ipisch, all right? She was a teenage Dutch resistance fighter, 1925 to 2012. She was born in Zaandam, Holland, just north of Amsterdam. Her father was a very prominent Christian minister, and he was also part of the resistance in Holland. Here are some photographs, a photograph of her parents. All right, on the bottom is their home. They were very, very wealthy. All right, and the home that they lived in, because he was a minister of the Dutch Reformed Church, it was called a parsonage. All right, so that's where she lived. Here's a picture of Hanneke and her sister, and looks like they were very well dressed, happy. They did a lot of fun things together. Oop. Is there another one? No, okay. So in 1943 and 1944, as she grew up, she decided, because since her father was in the Dutch resistance, she found out about that in secret by overhearing her father. She was eavesdropping with her father and someone else. In fact, the person who owned a vegetable store, a vegetable stand, where in the back of the store they would hold secret resistance groups. What a great front, you know, that you would have a vegetable stand and you go in the back and something illegal was going on, all right? Her first false identification name was Ellie Van Dijk, all right? And at one time, she saw children being discriminated against, being treated poorly because she was Jewish, so she would help those families get on a ferry, a little boat, to a place called Friesland, a town north of Zaandam, all right? And she met the resistance groups at the vegetable store often, was very much involved, wanted to do more. Her family even hid Jewish people that were wanted in the attic of their home. 1944 to 1945, things got really heavy. She ramped things up in her resistance fighting. Her second false name was Miep, and she became a courier. A courier is a messenger, someone who goes from place to place, giving messages, bringing papers, and so forth, who needed it. And she became part of the resistance group of a man called Walraven Van Hall, who was at that time known as the resistance banker of Holland. He raised money for resistance fighters, took it out of the Dutch bank. He was very wealthy himself, so he had a lot of associates that could help in his cause. And so what he did is he trusted Haneke to take large sums of money by bicycle from one place to another to deliver it to a second resistance group. And also she had to change, if people were watching her, sometimes, she changed her clothes, but she also threw the bicycle to one side, picked up somebody else's bike to disguise herself by not using the same bicycle all the same time. All right, and also it was her job to find secret meeting places for these resistance groups every Friday. That was her job, and to go back to Walraven Van Hall, tell him where the meetings were going to be. So on the upper left is a everyday picture of the house where one of these Friday meetings happened. If you look at the color picture on the upper right, upper left, down at the bottom where it's white brick with a white staircase, because all of these houses are one after another adjoining, that is the home that the Gestapo found Walraven Van Hall and her and other resistance fighters. They were sent to this prison, and this is a present-day photograph of the prison, and there's a picture of Walraven Van Hall. He was executed right away. She was sent to prison, all right, and on the upper left is a certificate that was sent to Haneke's family about her being in prison. I mean, they were nice enough to do that, but they gave the family certain restrictions. She could have food, she could have clothing, all right, she could have laundry. I think that's pretty good at that time to be able to get fresh laundry in a prison, all right? But under no circumstances was there to be any communication between her and her family or the outside world. So on the right there is a photograph of what she did to get around that. She took little pieces of the linens or the towels or the clothing, cut them up, and wrote what was happening in the prison or what it was that she needed. And so look how tiny those were that were saved by her family. She managed to be released. She grew up. She went to Sweden, got married, went to the United States, came here, started a bed and breakfast. She lectured all around the country about her experiences. She wrote several books, and this is the one that I read of her, called Sky, Daring and Courage During World War II. Unfortunately, she died in 2012 from, what do you know, from Alzheimer's. She couldn't remember anything, probably. So there's K Ipisch. My last guest for you today is Cornelia Corey ten Boom, 1892 to 1983 in Harlem, the Netherlands. She was a Dutch watchmaker. She was a writer and a resistance fighter. Corey's father, there's a photograph of Corey's parents. He was a very famous and very well-to-do jeweler and watchmaker. She grew up in a very religious family, all right, similar to K Ipisch. There you see a common thread there in the Dutch Reformed Church. Her mother died early, all right? So she learned her father's trade. She knew she didn't want to be, at this point, a wife and a mother. She wanted to be a jeweler just like her dad, all right? But her love and her faith in God, all right, that was a catalyst from her parents. She started children's girls' clubs and for religious education, for the performing arts, for sewing, and that's where she got her ideas to help out. All right? The quiet life in Harlem, again, when the Nazis invaded in 1940, their life changed in their home. They became very active in resistance by hiding people that were wanted by the Gestapo. All right? She was aided by her sister Betsy, but Corey was really the ringleader, the leader of finding safe homes for people in which to live. So here's a picture of her family. A reader of the Old Testament, Caspar ten Boom, said that the Jews were considered God's chosen people. And one of his famous quotes was, "In this household, God's people are always welcome." All right, as I said, they became very active in the Dutch underground. Here we have a picture on the upper right, a photograph of people, Jews, leaving. You could see the mandatory yellow Star of David that they had to wear. The other two pictures were of the people that they hid. They could only hide in their home, the maximum of 7 people. And they became sort of like family. Some stayed for months, others maybe just a day or two. But as you see, they were sort of like part of the family. They sang with the family. They prayed with the family. Even the Ten Boom family learned about the Torah and were honoring the Jewish Sabbath on Friday night to Saturday, all to help them. They sang songs, played the piano, but there was a hitch. Only 7 could be entered into the household. And what to do if an unwanted Nazi soldier or Gestapo were to come knocking on their door. All right? They would only have 70 seconds, all the people that were hiding, 70 seconds to go up a staircase, get into that hiding place, and to be perfectly quiet. So if a woman had a sweater and maybe a purse, she'd have to gather that up with her. If they were at the dining table and eating, they would have to take their plates, their napkins, their forks, their spoons, their knives, everything, so that there wouldn't be any evidence that more than the Ten Boom family was living there. 70 seconds, not a lot of time, especially when it was unannounced. So they went up into a closet. It was a linen closet, and I'll show you a picture. All right, here we go. This is what it looks like today. If you look at the upper left, there is a linen closet, but the bottom shelf is empty, and that's what the cutout was. They had to open the door of the linen closet and bend over and crawl in and then stand up. All right, the picture to the right shows the narrow closet, and they had to stand shoulder to shoulder, perfectly still, until it was safe to come out. The bottom left in the green shows from the closet outward into that bedroom. It was in Corey's bedroom that this closet was. And today is a photograph of the actual, they call it the Ten Boom Museum, where the watch and the jewelry store were. Up on the second floor was their home. So imagine that, everybody. How quickly would it be for you in your homes to pack everything up and to hide into a closet with 7 other people? Mostly probably people you don't even know. Couldn't talk, couldn't eat. In the middle picture there was probably like a little potty pot or something there if they needed it, but probably not. When it was all clear, they could get out. Right. Here is a picture of Corey as an older woman, showing how the part where they had to crawl under to get into that closet. All right, it is a museum today, so whenever you're in Amsterdam, all right, you can visit there, as well as the Anne Frank house. All right, the hiding place was eventually discovered. Somebody ratted them out. That's usually the case, all right? And luckily, the people that were hiding weren't found during that raid. Corey, her father, and Betsy and brother all were arrested and sent to a prison, all right? Going back to the people that were hiding, they stayed in there 48 hours, 2 days, without getting out, until a friend of the Ten Booms came in and said, all is clear. However, the family is gone. You better get out of here too. All right? So the family went to prison. Unfortunately, Casper passed away in the prison. Corey and Betsy were taken to a concentration camp called Ravensbrook, which is outside of Berlin, and that's where Betsy died there. Ravensbrook was originally a women's camp designed to train women of the Nazi organization to become women guards. The situation, as you see in the photographs there, was hard labor, little food, torturing, probably disease, starvation as well. But Corey, miraculously, and she believes it's through her faith in God, that she was on a list to be released. All right? And so she left, went back to Holland to begin her ministry for 33 years. She was about in her mid-50s when all of this happened. She wasn't a young girl like Sarah was, or Hannah Senesch, who was 23 when she was executed. She was in her 50s when she started her resistance fighting with her family, and then came back and did 33 more years of training and teaching of her experiences, spreading her faith in God, and how lucky she was, miraculously, to go unscathed on this. Right? Corey Ten Boom was phenomenal in writing books. I read the book The Hiding Place. You might be interested in reading that one. You can get that one at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. And lots of books about her faith in God. And she died at the age of 91. All right? Let me go back. There is a little book on Hannah Senesch, the story So Young to Die, the paratrooper that I told you about. This is another book. So I've read all of these books and suggest that if you're interested in any of them, that you do the same. Corey Ten Boom has quite a few. Irena Sendler, who was with the children, has a couple of books. And but this was the only one for Sarah Gennate, the only one out of her. So anyway, I would like to close. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay? Good. We're good. All right.
Ask if anybody has questions.
I felt that this was important for you to learn. I hope that you got something out of it, and to appreciate the role of women, not only in the Holocaust, everyone, but the role of women as actors in all historical events. Many, you look up online and want to find out resistance fighters or rescuers of the Holocaust. The list of men, and I'm not diminishing that at all. The list of men is profound. And then every so often you get the dotted names of women who've done something. And it's not just these 5 women. There were tens upon tens of other women in Poland, in Lithuania, in France, that did almost the same thing. And what did they need? What did they need to do this? First of all, they needed to have an open heart. They needed to have courage. They needed to have the courage to say, look, this is wrong, and I want to do something about it. I am not going to be complicit. I am not going to be a collaborator with them. I'm going to live, hopefully, and I want to tell about it. And so with that, I would like to thank you for listening to my story of all of these wonderful women. Are there any questions? Can we take a question or two?
Yes, you
Does
can
anybody
take
have a
questions.
question or a comment that you have? Come on, I know it's early, but. Yes, ma'am. No, I am a retired teacher from St. Jerome Catholic School in Fort Lauderdale. I taught 32 years in Catholic education, and at that point, not many Catholic schools were teaching Holocaust. Maybe a couple of comments in their social studies classes, but I taught it through literature because, one, it got kids to read because it was a topic that they were interested in. And once they got interested in it, they understood the horrors of it and what it was that they could do to be part of the greater culture of kindness and compassion today. So thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
I have a comment and a question.
Yes.
The comment is that I couldn't help but notice that many of these women were well educated, and I was wondering if there's a connection there, that their stories survived first of all, and that they were morally obliged to go in and help, even if they were not Jews, even if they were from Reformed churches,
Yeah.
Catholic.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, that's the common thread. If you notice through some of the stories that their upbringing was one of values of compassion and faith, and so by that, the teachings are of those tenets. So that's also one. A couple of them, mother died and rose above that. Several of them, their father died when they were young, even when helping others, as Irena Sandler was. So, yeah, and I do believe that a little bit of affluence on some of them was a common thread among all of them, and just who they were. They saw it, didn't like it, and let's do something about it. Yes, sir. Haneke or Hannah Senesch, the Paratrooper? So Young to Die. I mean, this is a little scholastic book. Most of you could read this in 30 seconds, but it tells the whole story, all right? And not much about her, not a whole lot of photographs of her, strictly because she didn't live long enough and didn't write an autobiography. So if you're interested. Someone else? Yes, sir. Who? Oh, Corrie ten Boom, the Netherlands. Yes, isn't that something that both of them lived pretty close to one another? All right. And why did I choose two people from the same country? Because of their ages, too. All right. Sarah was very young, a teenager, when she started ferrying people off and doing her courier work, where Corrie ten Boom was in her 50s. I wanted that to be known that the resistance had no barrier on age, all right, or ability, all right? Somebody else? Come on. Yes? Sure. Okay, I'm going to give you one of the most trusted websites that you can use to find anything about anti-Semitism, resistance, ghetto life, all about the Holocaust, and that is the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So it is ushmm.org, ushmm.org, and there you will find, it is a very prestigious website. It is very accurate. Of course, we need to be very careful about the websites that we go on to for accuracy and authenticity. But you would have no problem with ushmm.org, and you can look that up, Holocaust for students, Holocaust education for teachers, and you can find quite a few people there. All right?
Wendy.
Oh, gotta go.
So this handout, which their professors can email them,
Okay.
if you look at the handout that your professors can email you, on the back, there's a link to Jewish resistance during the Holocaust, but also 21 videos on resistance during the Holocaust that come from the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. They have hundreds, probably thousands of different videos, documentaries on all of the topics of the Holocaust. And we also have a LibGuide at Miami-Dade, which also can be sent to you on the Holocaust that we continue to update.
Okay.
Wendy-
So with that, I'd
Oh,
like
wait, I
to
have
say
one more
thank you.
question.
Sure.
Wendy, were the Jewish resistance fighters treated worse when they were caught?
Sometimes. Depends on how obedient they were and how much information they could get out of them. You know, of course, some of them that we talked about were tortured and obviously put to death, but, you know, depended on how much information that they had, what parts did they play, how long they had been looking for them.
And one more question.
Sure.
Were the Jewish ghettos just during the Holocaust, or did they precede the Holocaust?
Yes, there were the very first ones happened in Venice, Italy. And I think Armenians once had ghettos and so forth. But the word ghetto in the Holocaust was for the Jews, undesirables, as they were called, political opponents of the state, of Hitler, of Jehovah's Witnesses, of Catholics. Oh yeah, Catholic priests and sisters were sometimes put in ghettos or executed. Let's see, and the Stinti or the Roma, which were the gypsies. All of those were fall under Hitler's idea of the undesirables, the disabled, the very, very young, the very, very old. All of those were considered his undesirables and had to be taken out of Germany and eventually put to death. Okay?
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, what was the name of that book that I gave? I forgot. Oh, geez. The History of the Holocaust is one, probably. You can get that on Amazon if you want to do the State of Deception. That's from the Holocaust Museum in D.C.
The library also has books on the Holocaust,
Yeah.
and actually they have a current exhibit right now if you go over to our library on Holocaust
Oh, here's
books.
one. The World Never Knew. The World Never Knew. That's a really big hardback one. I don't know, maybe, you know, if the college has it or get it on, you know, but that's a really comprehensive one too.
And the LibGuide will also have books, films, documentaries that you can look up. So your professors can send you the LibGuide, which is like a website.
Okay.
Thank you, Wendy, for so much.
Thank you so
We
much,
appreciate
Professor
you being
Garman.
here.
I appreciate it, all of you for being so attentive.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. If you're in my class, could you come up and sign in on my attendance sheet if you don't mind before you leave? Thank you so much, Wendy. You're welcome. Oh, one more thing. I'm so sorry. Really easy. Very easy. You guys, before you leave, I'm so sorry. Would you mind standing? I know I already asked, but can you scan this QR code and take the survey? I think it's like two or three questions. If you don't mind with your phone, if you wouldn't mind. We would really appreciate it. If you're in my class and you didn't sign this sheet, please come up.